For the second straight game, the Sacramento Kings lose to the Denver Nuggets. Another hard-fought battle in which the refs took center stage when they never are supposed to. So much so that even Harrison Barnes was critical of the officials after the game. But the Kings themselves cared a little bit too much about officiating and not closing this game out. Unfortunately, another loss for the Kings here. And they now fall to 2-4 since the Tyrese Halliburton, Domantas Sabonis swap. And of course, with this Kings team being in a play-in race, every loss is potentially the nail in the coffin for these Sacramento Kings. And in addition to that, De'Aaron Fox, who I thought had a good game, faded a little bit too much for me in the fourth quarter. Me pointing that out has apparently made me a Sacramento Kings or De'Aaron Fox hater on Twitter. I'm still going to share why I think Fox needs to be more active in that fourth quarter. And we saw former Sacramento King, many would say Sacramento Kings legend DeMarcus Cousins, take on his former team tonight, playing for the Denver Nuggets. And in true Boogie fashion, a lot of hard fouls, a lot of technicals, and I kind of feel bad for DeMarcus for how he's still treated by the officials. We'll talk about it all on today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. If you're looking for in-depth analysis, game-by-game breakdowns, highlights, interviews with local and national experts, full coverage of your Sacramento Kings from January through December, this is the place for you, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I've been a Sacramento sports media member for the last 7 years, my 8th season covering Kings basketball for ABC 10 News here in Sacramento. And I'm going back and forth, truth be told, about how I feel about this loss. Like, I'm disappointed in specific things from this loss. I'm also very encouraged by some things about this loss. I'm, of course, disappointed with the fact that the Kings lost another winnable game when they are in a play-in and playoff race, even if to many Kings fans, that's no longer the focus. I know that still is a focus for this Kings team, so that's the bar that I'm going to continue to hold them to. But, I mean, you still lost in Denver to the Nuggets, who are one of the better teams in the NBA, who have the reigning defending MVP in Nikola Jokic. Yes, the Nuggets are missing two very important players in Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr., but that's still a damn good team. And the Sacramento Kings themselves are trying to get used to playing together and figuring things out. And we knew these two games against the Nuggets were always going to be difficult for Sacramento. I'm not trying to make excuses at all for the Kings by saying that, because again, this was a winnable game. Both of these meetings against the Denver Nuggets were winnable games. This one ended up being a lot more friendly final score in terms of the Kings only losing by 5, 115-110, instead of losing by whatever they lost by on Thursday in Sacramento. The final score was not indicative of how close that game really was. At least the fourth quarter, the Kings didn't unravel and things didn't get out of hand. Some of the positives, small positives that have really nothing to do with specific players that I'd like to point out. One is that the Kings managed to close the gap. They were down by 8 or 9 points at one point early on in the fourth quarter, and they closed that gap. They went on a run, and they did so with Nikola Jokic on the bench. And I've talked a lot recently. I talked about it on the most recent Kings podcast, not yesterday's with Rafael Barlow talking about the NBA draft class, but the one before that after Thursday night's game. I talked about this, and we've seen this a number of times, not just this season, but over the course of this entire playoff drought. The Kings will, for some reason, miss out or not capitalize on opportunities when key players, important players, the best players of their opponents are sitting on the bench getting rest. The Kings managed to take advantage of that in this game tonight. And even when Jokic came back into the game, it's not like Denver suddenly became monumentally better. Now, a nitpicky frustration that I have with this Kings team is definitely something that I talked about before, which is the Kings sometimes rely on their 8-0, 9-0, 10-0 runs that they put together on a nightly basis. Consistently, the Kings put together pretty solid offensive runs, and they get stops when they need to sometimes. But during these runs, they're typically needing these runs just to get back into the game, just to tie the game up or take a 1 or 2 point lead. At what point are the Kings going to become a team that is good enough to use these runs and be in a position to go on these runs that build them a 5, 6, 7, 8 point lead? Because we see opposing teams use those runs to go up on the Kings and build a little bit of a cushion on the Kings all the time. And Sacramento did take their fair share of leads in this game. They had multiple chances to build a little bit of a bigger lead and really failed to do that. I give a lot of credit, of course, to the Denver Nuggets and just how good of a team they are, how well coached they are by Mike Malone. But I mean, you're looking at 10 lead changes in this team or in this game. 15 times this game was tied. Kings never led by more than 7. Nuggets never led by more than 9. This game was close from start to finish, but still the main runs that the Kings went on in this game were to get them back to even, back to all square. And I'd like to see the Kings find a way to put together more productive runs and use their productive runs that they do have nightly to build a lead. Now, one area that I need to give the Kings a lot of credit for as a team is defensively, they improved as this game went on. To start the game, defense was as we expected it to be. It was really, really bad. Like the Kings were getting torched from 3-point range. What else is new? They gave up 38 points in the first quarter, managed to score 30 of their own, but were down by 8 after giving up that many, nearly 40 points in the first quarter. And you're thinking, oh God, here we go. The Nuggets are going to just have a field day up in the elevation on their home floor, and the Kings are not going to be able to really maintain that or maintain their offensive output in order to keep the game close. Well, in the second and third quarters, the Kings held the Nuggets to 21 points and then 26 points. Unfortunately, in the fourth quarter, the Kings went back to giving up 30 and were torched from 3-point range again, giving up a couple of big shots. But as a team, defensively, the Kings did better as the game went on. And they proved that the Kings are not a good defensive team. Like, we know this. The Kings are not a good defensive basketball team, but they have the capability to be good enough to win and to hang on a nightly basis. Now, if they can get from good enough to actually just good defensively with how good their offensive possibilities are with Fox and Sabonis now, like that's the next step, of course, for this Kings team. One of many next steps that they need to take. And I don't expect that to happen at all this season. And maybe that's what needs to happen for the Kings to actually have a chance at the playoffs, meaning they're not going to make the playoffs this year. Whatever, that's fine. I can accept that. That needs to happen next season. That needs to improve next season for sure, but that's in the future. Let's talk about right now. Right now, we know the Kings defensively are not good enough to rely on their defense nightly, but it can be decent enough. Team defense can be solid enough with the effort and intensity that requires to stay close, to come back, to improve after giving up 38 points in the fourth quarter, or rather first quarter, to one of the best teams in the NBA. Or one of the better teams, I should say, in the NBA, in the Denver Nuggets. Like the Kings proved that tonight. But what's most important is it takes that effort and intensity from basically everybody. And when one guy doesn't match that effort and intensity, that shows. And that one guy can be anybody. Like a lot of people look at De'Aaron Fox and put that on De'Aaron Fox. And sure, there are moments where Fox takes plays off defensively and the Kings suffer for it. But there are also moments where every player, Sabonis included, Harrison Barnes even, when you take a play off defensively, this Kings team usually gives up a bucket and gets torched. So unless everybody's playing with basically 100% effort on every defensive possession, we know the Kings aren't going to have a chance at being a solid defensive team at this point in time. The officiating in this game was not good. Like, that's the easiest take that I'm going to have in this podcast. The defense, or rather the officiating, was really bad on both sides. Completely inconsistent. However, from the Kings' perspective, of course, and with my Kings bias hosting the Locked On Kings podcast, it seemed to go more in the favor of the Nuggets than it did the Kings. However, I know there are a million moments where I'm sure Nuggets fans are saying the opposite, that the Kings got their fair share of good calls and the Nuggets weren't getting that treatment. Look, Nikola Jokic is the defending MVP. He is going to get the calls that DeMarcus Sabonis is not going to get. Sorry, that's the way it is. It may not be fair. You may not like it. I don't like it. That is the NBA. That is the way it is. That is the way it always has been, and it does nothing to complain about it. And I'm guilty too. I complain about it all the time. I get pissed off with how LeBron James is officiated and how much LeBron James can get away with, especially when he's jawing at the officials. Same thing with Luka Doncic right now. Like Luka Doncic jaws at the officials and gets away with murder. Meanwhile, if DeMarcus Cousins opens his mouth, he gets a technical foul. Like, it's not fair, but that's the way it is. That's the way it always has been. So to see Nikola Jokic get calls on one end that Domantas Sabonis isn't getting on the other end, I get that's frustrating for Sabonis. I get that's frustrating for the Kings, especially when it's a close game and it's a hard-fought battle and both those guys are extremely physical. But what do you expect? Like, Nikola Jokic almost fouled out of this game, but then the call was reversed upon review with like 6 seconds left. It wouldn't have mattered anyway, but he almost fouled out of the game. That call was overturned. Kings fans were outraged. How in the world, Katie Christensen on the broadcast, how in the world, objectively, is that not a foul? It's because he's an MVP and he's a big guy. And I get that by rule book, and it sounds like I'm defending the officials here, and I'm really not meaning to. My point is, I think there was way too much focus on the officiating in this game from the Kings themselves, from Kings players. And look, Harrison Barnes said after the game, he called out the officiating. He's probably going to get a fine for that. And you know what? That's fine. He made that choice. And if Harrison Barnes is saying things, if Harrison Barnes is complaining or speaking up about it, I didn't even really read it as complaining or listen to it as complaining. It was more like, here's a statement of fact. He talked about how he would talk to the officials about a missed call. They would say, oh, my bad, we missed that. And then they continued to miss foul calls as the game went on. Like, that's just Harrison pointing out something that he thinks is wrong and needs to change. I get that. I appreciate that. If Harrison is saying stuff like that, people need to listen, and people tend to listen, even if there's going to be a fine slapped onto that because you're not supposed to talk about the officiating. But at the same time, too, I don't think the Kings lost this game because of the officiating. I think they lost this game because of a combination of things. Unfortunate foul calls sure were a difference. The Kings could have had a fair share more free throws towards the end of the game that could have made the difference. But at the same time, too, the Kings got to the line 33 times and only hit 25 of them for 75%. You left 8 points at the foul line. You make 4 of those, well, you still lose. You make 5 of those, you tie. So, like, I understand frustration in the moment in a hard-fought battle when the officiating is not consistent. And again, it was not consistent by any means. The refs are not excused for how they called this game. In fact, I think the last 2-minute report is probably going to be brutal, and NBA needs to take a look at games like this that are so incorrectly officiated and hold officials accountable and do something about it. I 100% agree with that. But I don't think the Kings were screwed by the officials in this game like we've certainly seen the Kings be screwed by officials in the past. And if the Nuggets had lost this game, the Nuggets would have claimed that they had been screwed. That wasn't the case either. It was inconsistent on both ends. But I personally felt that the Kings focused on that a little too much complaining. And in the fourth quarter, they seemed to lose focus on what was going right for them. And things kind of fell apart. At the same time, too, this Kings team, they're not there yet. And they haven't been there for a long time, to be fair. But this is a new group together. They just don't seem comfortable and on the same page yet when it comes to winning time. You saw a good 2-man game connection between Fox and Sabonis to tie the game up. And then I think the Nuggets either hit a 3 or hit a 2 to retake the lead. And then back down the floor again, the Kings tried on the other end of the floor from the other wing, closer to the camera side, another 2-man game connection between Fox and Sabonis, and ended up in a turnover. Like, it's simple. It's too simple, and it's easy to defend. It's easy if you know it's coming, it's easy to stop. The Kings aren't reinventing the wheel with their offense here. Their offense is changing because now they have a passing big to play through in Domantas Sabonis, and they have a 1-2 connection with Fox and Sabonis that they didn't have a couple of weeks ago. So it's changing in that sense, but they're not doing anything that's crazy or abnormal or nothing that the Nuggets or anybody hasn't seen. So this Kings team still needs to work on finding out how to play together and be effective and be efficient and close out games. So it doesn't surprise me that they struggled the way that they did. Domantas Sabonis overcame a rough start, getting in foul trouble, turned in a good stat line, had his fair share of problems. He's not absolved of criticism. De'Aaron Fox had his first double-double of the season, apparently. Really liked his stat line, liked a lot of what he brought. He's not absolved of criticism either. And even when I point out criticism of De'Aaron Fox, apparently now I'm a De'Aaron Fox and Sacramento Kings hater. I'll talk about that a little bit. Plus, I do want to talk about DeMarcus Cousins and how he continues to be treated by officials. We'll get to that here after I tell you about Built Bar. Built Bars are the protein bars that taste like candy bars covered in 100% chocolate. Built Bar has been such an amazing sponsor and supporter of the Locked On Kings podcast here for, I think, like 2 years now. And Built Bars have become a key part of my life, my diet, my daily routine, really. I have Built Bars. I take them with me to work every single morning. And look, I work in TV. I work in news. I leave the house at 2:30 a.m. every single day. I don't have time to make myself breakfast. Thankfully, I can grab a Built Bar that can help me during that breakfast time with those breakfast munchies, or I can use it as a snack later on in my shift as I get closer to lunch, which for me is like 9 a.m., which is crazy. The thing is, Built Bars they're so versatile. They do so well in so many different scenarios, whether you need a little pick me up if you're playing around a golf like I do, if you need something to pick you up before or after a gym session, if you need something just to replace candy bars that are a whole lot healthier for you. Built Bars do all of those. Plus, they have a ton of great, delicious flavors for you to try. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar that has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. At Built Bar, they're all about the taste. They make their bars taste delicious first, and then they figure out how to make it healthy. And that's what's extremely important, at least for picky eaters like me. Go to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off of your order. Again, that's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Domantas Sabonis was absolutely dominant for the Kings in their loss against the Denver Nuggets on Thursday night in Sacramento. And it didn't look like it was going to be the same kind of game for Sabonis. And it wasn't the same kind of game for Sabonis tonight in Denver. And yet the Kings had a better chance to win, and the final score was more in the Kings' favor. Why? Because Sabonis had more help. And in the end, Domantas didn't have the greatest of stat lines. I mean, he had a pretty still effective, and I think his 38th double-double of the season, 14 points, 16 rebounds, also had 7 assists. So once again, flirting with a triple-double, did have a steal and a block shot in there as well. Played about as well as you could hope to play against Nikola Jokic, who finished with a triple-double. Of course, the reigning MVP is an absolute beast, but he finished with 18 points, 11 assists, 10 rebounds. Like Jokic, what can you do to stop him? I thought Sabonis did a phenomenal job on Jokic in both of these games, did about as good as you could possibly do. So I applaud Sabonis for that. However, in this game in particular, Sabonis got into a lot of foul trouble, which kept his minutes down. As a whole, Sabonis only played 33 minutes in this game. And a bulk of those minutes came with him closing out the game and playing the last 8 or 9 straight minutes, which the Kings needed him to play. But there were times when, especially early on in the game, he was out when the Kings could have used his production, and the Kings were kind of floundering, trying to figure out how to be effective and how to run their offense without him. That's why they leaned so heavily on De'Aaron Fox and Harrison Barnes tonight, both who responded. We'll talk about Harrison Barnes really quickly before we get to De'Aaron Fox, who I'm going to spend some time on. In nearly 38 minutes, Harrison Barnes had 24 points, went like 7 of 16 from the field, which is great to see. A perfect 9 of 9 from the free throw line, and he was expecting to go there a little bit more. Also had 5 rebounds, 3 assists, and he was just the solid Harrison Barnes that the Kings need. And that Harrison has not been present in the last few Kings games, which no surprise. When Harrison doesn't play well, the Kings' chances of winning plummet significantly. Like, I'm not expecting Harrison to be a 20 plus points per game player on a nightly basis, but they're going to need 16, 18 from him a night if they want a chance to win, at least for the remainder of this season and probably going into next season. That's how important he is. And I know Harrison Barnes is streaky. He's also solid. He's consistent in some areas, streaky in others, especially when it comes to scoring. The Kings need consistent scoring from Harrison Barnes right now with their lack of shooting and really other offensive star power outside of Fox and Sabonis. But when Harrison plays like this, the Kings have a good chance of winning. They had a good chance of winning in this game. I thought the Kings were smart to rely on the steadiness of Barnes, especially at times having him work mismatches against Austin Rivers in the post in the fourth quarter. However, this leads into my main criticism of De'Aaron Fox. I felt that comparing Fox and Barnes in the fourth quarter, the wrong guy was the one with the ball in his hands the majority of the time. and I'll get to that here in just a second. I'm not going to start with a negative with Fox, though, because I don't want to fuel the narrative that people suddenly have that I'm a De'Aaron Fox hater. Fox had a good game. He had a very good game. And I mean, I tweeted out sometime in the second quarter, Fox had like 13 points. And comparing his 13 points at that point, if he had not scored a single point for the remainder of the game, it would have been disappointing. The Kings' chances of losing or winning would have gone way, way down. But his 13 points in that first half were far more effective than any of the 20 points that he scored against the Nuggets on Thursday night. And you could see it. Fox was aggressive. He was attacking. He was using his offense to find opportunities for his teammates. I mean, anytime De'Aaron Fox gets 10 assists, that's something to be celebrated regardless of the result of the game. Like, that needs to be encouraged. The Kings did not lose this game because Fox was too passive with the ball for the night. A 26-point, 10-assist double-double, apparently his first double-double of the season, which kind of shocked me. Not that I'm not using that as a criticism of Fox. I'm just saying I'm surprised he hasn't had a double-double yet. Like, a 26-point, 10-assist double-double, I will take every day of the week from De'Aaron Fox. So I'm 100% okay with that stat line. Overall, I'm happy with what I saw out of Fox. A majority of the time, if you're getting 26 and 10 out of Fox and a 16 rebound double-double from Domantas Sabonis, the Kings are going to be in pretty good shape. Unfortunately, they only got 14 points out of Sabonis in this game. And unfortunately, when it came to the fourth quarter, De'Aaron Fox wasn't aggressive enough to me. This is where my criticism of Fox comes in. And maybe it's nitpicky, but at the same time, too, the Kings lost the freaking game. The Kings are in a play-in race. Every game matters from here on out. So there is no silver lining for me here on the Locked On Kings podcast. There's not a silver lining, a moral victory for me on Kings Twitter. I'm not going to be proud of how Fox and Sabonis played together when the Kings lost another winnable game when the goal is making the postseason. That is the goal right now. I mean, to some fans, the goal might be a draft pick or draft lottery odds. That might be the goal of Monty McNair, although I highly doubt it. The goal for these Kings players, this Kings coaching staff, is to win games right now. So that is the bar that I hold them to. And the Kings lost, so I'm going to be critical about something. And even if the Kings won, I would have said the same thing. De'Aaron Fox in the fourth quarter was not aggressive enough to me. Is he the reason the Kings lost the game? Absolutely not. De'Aaron had a solid game. De'Aaron played better than Domantas Sabonis did. De'Aaron was the better player tonight than Domantas Sabonis in this game. It's not his fault or Sabonis' fault or any one person's fault that the Kings lost. However, when the Kings needed more out of Fox in the fourth quarter, to me, as the max player superstar that the Kings expect him to be, he was way too passive. Way too passive. The ball was in Sabonis' hands and Harrison Barnes' hands the majority of the fourth quarter down the stretch. Now, Sabonis doesn't surprise me because the Kings run their offense through Domantas Sabonis. And the Kings tried to run Fox off of some cuts, and there wasn't anything there. They didn't force anything. I'm not saying that Fox didn't try and that he was just standing around with his hands in his pockets. But the amount of time that the Kings decided, let's run through Harrison Barnes. Let's give Barnes a shot in the high post or the low post, or let Barnes try and create and attack the basket instead of De'Aaron Fox in the fourth quarter. That's a problem to me, especially when the Kings lose the game. Had they won the game, okay, it worked. But they didn't. They lost, and Fox, I think, could have been more efficient, more effective, more aggressive in the fourth quarter. He wasn't. He still had some good moments. He still had some good connections. He was not what I personally and what I think the Kings need him to be in that moment. If De'Aaron Fox takes over that game, Kings win. No doubt about it in my mind. If De'Aaron Fox becomes that takeover Fox that we have seen and we saw last season, Kings win that game. Because when Fox goes into takeover mode, he's impossible to stop. But for some reason, that version of Fox only shows up every once in a while. And the majority of the time, that Fox has shown up during this post-Halliburton trade. And it's important for me to continue to point out, and I have sung the praises of De'Aaron Fox. The Kings have gotten a better version of Fox since that trade. I don't know how many times I need to say it's not because Halliburton was holding him back. It's because this is a better team. This is a better fit for De'Aaron. And that has been widely ignored when it shouldn't be. But at the same time, too, when you have a bad performance like you did against Denver on Thursday night, you follow it up with a good 3 quarters, you have a chance to win on the road, and you're as passive as I thought De'Aaron was, That's not good enough, especially when you lose during a play-in race. That's when you need your guy to step up, and to me, he didn't step up. Does that make me a De'Aaron Fox hater? Fine, I guess, according to some people on social media. I don't get why. I'm critical of everybody when it matters. And to Fox, the spotlight is shining brightest on him right now. And it's going to shine brighter and brighter this offseason going into next season, assuming he's still a Sacramento King. It's the way it is. But again, he had a solid night. I was pleased with his night. I honestly wasn't too pleased for DeMarcus Cousins. Not at DeMarcus Cousins. I wasn't pleased for him. Because as much as I had my issues with DeMarcus Cousins as a Sacramento King, man, his how he's treated by the officials, that has never changed. I'm going to talk about that a little bit before we wrap up. But first, I want to tell you about Bet Online, a place for you to make money off of your Sacramento Kings basketball or just general sports knowledge. Football is over for the season. I know, sorry, we have to wait till next fall for that. But basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props, to even where the next fired coach is going to land, betonline.net is the number one spot for all of your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. It's not just basketball. BetOnline has your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, even baseball if that ever happens again. Football, of course, when that's going on. They have it all. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action at BetOnline, where the game starts. Look, I know DeMarcus Cousins has a reputation around the NBA for not being the nicest to officials, the most appropriate at times. He certainly has his ego. He certainly has his attitude. And I will also be the first to say that DeMarcus in his dominance is not as dominant as he was without that attitude. Right now, unfortunately, because of Cousins' injuries, that dominance is gone. But the attitude, that's still there. That is still there. And I'm glad that that's Denver's problem and not the Kings' problem, because I was very tired of his attitude and his antics when he was a Sacramento King by the time it was all said and done. That being said, I've never felt that DeMarcus has gotten or been given the benefit of the doubt by NBA officials, period. Now, a lot of that is his own doing, but every time I watch DeMarcus Cousins play, the officials are almost expecting to blow the whistle against him for anything. Common fouls, charges versus blocks, physicality around the basket, technical fouls, which Boogie got called for another tech in this game. He had a hard screen. It was a hard screen on De'Aaron. He stuck his hip out and knocked De'Aaron down. It was an illegal screen for sure. I have no problem with the foul call. But they spent 2, 3, 4 minutes reviewing it, seeing if it was a flagrant or anything excessive. That's so unnecessary. But because it's DeMarcus Cousins, they review that. Like, there's no way. And I know that moment was kind of retaliation for Cousins being frustrated on the other end of the floor because he didn't get a foul call, but he was not intentionally trying to hurt anybody. I didn't expect to defend DeMarcus Cousins at any point again here on the Locked On Kings podcast, but here I am. Like, when I watch DeMarcus Cousins play, I see the same thing from officiating that I saw for years here in Sacramento. And I feel bad for the guy, especially when he's just a journeyman who's now at this point just trying to find his last shot in the NBA. Now, of course, he did have his scrap with Dante DiVincenzo, who he was teammates with in Milwaukee like a month ago, which is crazy to think about. But calling Cousins for a technical foul in that scrap, I guess. I'm glad Dante DiVincenzo didn't get slapped with a technical. I think he would have been just fine just letting each guy move on and being done with it. But instead, like, DeMarcus gets the tech because he's DeMarcus Cousins. I don't know. I feel bad for the guy. All right, now I want to hear from you. Kings fans who have known DeMarcus Cousins and followed DeMarcus Cousins for a while, your thoughts on that situation, your thoughts on De'Aaron Fox. Am I being too critical? Be honest with me. Like, I don't think I am. I think I'm being completely fair. And I'm still a major believer and supporter in De'Aaron Fox. I don't have any kind of agenda, although some people apparently believe I have an agenda and I'm fueling fan theories or fan opinions on Fox, negative fan opinions. It's not the case at all. I love De'Aaron Fox. I still very much believe in De'Aaron Fox. But am I being too critical? Let me know. I'm open to it. I'll listen to it. let me know at MattGeorgeSack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. Or if you're watching on YouTube, leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. Also, your thoughts on the game of Domantas Sabonis, your thoughts on the Kings defense, your thoughts on this game as a whole, please send them to me. I would love to hear from you. And that'll do it for another week here of the Locked On Kings podcast. Have tomorrow, Sunday off, although I know some of you may be listening to this pod on Sunday. If you are, hope you have a great Sunday. If you're listening late Saturday night, I hope you have a great Saturday night. Stay safe. I can't wait to have you join me on next week's edition of the Locked On Kings podcast. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.